Who knows? Maybe it is just for this moment that you find yourself in a position of leadership. I'm Rabbi Liz Hirsch, and I'm your host. Inspired by the story of Esther, I will invite women in leadership to talk about women and leadership. As CEO of Women of Reform Judaism, the women's affiliate of the largest Jewish denomination in North America, I am committed to sharing powerful stories of women who stand out in their fields, who have stepped up just for this moment. Each week, I interview women who are influencing the world around them. My guest today is Rabbi Jill Avrin. Welcome back to Season 5 of Just for This. Wow, I cannot believe that we are beginning our 5th season just in time for Purim. Every season, every episode, it is my profound honor to introduce you to incredible women, to share their stories. Inspired by Esther's bravery, I invite them to explore their leadership, to reflect on feminism and equity, to spotlight their resilience, their chutzpah, their impact, their spiritual resistance. Spiritual resistance, an act of public ritual offering internal strength and communal resilience. Queen Esther is, of course, one of our earliest biblical examples of spiritual resistance. We first see this term in a modern context, referring to acts of bravery during the Holocaust. We recall and honor the spiritual resistance of men and women, children and elders, in ghettos and camps, those who survived and those who perished. From private acts such as keeping diaries to risky public rituals, spiritual practice sustained our people in the darkest of times. As a teenager, I visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, where over 1 million people were murdered. We went to honor their memories. On Rosh Hashanah this past year, I had the unique opportunity to hear the blast of a shofar that was secretly blown in Auschwitz. An amazing, unbelievable act of spiritual resistance. Can you even imagine what went into concealing the shofar, the boldness to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing its mournful sound? Hearing that shofar, it was a direct auditory link to those spiritual resistors of Auschwitz. We all heard the same sound, the call of its wailing cry. Spiritual resistance takes on many forms. For over 2 years, courageous, ordinary people worked tirelessly for the release of the Israeli hostages. For over 100 weeks, each Saturday night, thousands gathered in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv and all around Israel and the world to demand that these sons and daughters return home. For 843 days, people from around the world stood in solidarity and joined protests and raised their voices and never, ever, ever gave up. We wore yellow ribbons and silver dog tags and masking tape and left chairs empty in our sanctuaries and our sukkahs. We learned their names and faces and stories just as we mourned for those who were killed in captivity, and cried for the senseless loss of life and the suffering of hostages, of soldiers, and of Palestinians. We believed, prayed, and never gave up. We brought them home. In the early months of the war, when so many hostages remained in Gaza, I led a delegation to Israel to bear witness. We called that mission, "We Will Not Be Silent," taking a line from the Hebrew song, Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other country. On the Saturday evening of our mission, we joined our Reform Movement colleagues and friends at Hostage Square, where every week they gathered for Havdalah, creating a sanctuary in the streets, to sing and pray together prior to those weekly protests for the return of the hostages and the end of the war. Singing and leading us in that song of protest is an experience I will never forget. I have no other country. Even if my land is aflame, I will not be silent. I will not give up reminding her, and I will sing in her ears until she will open her eyes. Spiritual resistance sustained us through these years of protest and pain. And as Ron Gvili Zichrono Livracha returned to Israel to be laid to rest just a few weeks ago, a painful chapter for the Jewish people and for all of us finally came to a close. Our hearts may still be broken, but our spiritual resistance never wavered. And in North America, in the United States, in the streets of Minneapolis and Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles and Toronto, clergy leaders and people of faith are standing up and resisting and saying enough is enough. Spiritual resistance takes so many forms, and it has to be right for you. Some may be ready to stand in the streets, to blow a shofar out loud for all to hear. All season long, this season, we'll be talking about what it means to be a spiritual resistor. The way that these women lead us with resilience, values, and bravery is an inspiration for us all. My guest today is no exception. Rabbi Jill Avrin is a leader in Minneapolis. We're thrilled to have her on the podcast today on our first episode of the season, to welcome in Purim and to be our first spiritual resistor showing up and sharing her story. May we learn from her example. May all the leaders among us, from Esther to this present moment, inspire us to step up and lead. Welcome back, and Chag Purim Sameach. May it be a happy and joyful Purim for us all.
I work for JCRC as a director of campus affairs and involved in a lot of other community projects. Proud graduate of HUC JIR 2013 New York campus, and have been in Minneapolis since ordination, working first in a synagogue setting for 10 years and then transitioning to organizational work.
Wonderful. We're so glad to have you here, especially a treat to have you on the podcast because we overlapped on the New York campus and got to study together. So I love when the podcast or any other work that I'm doing with Women of Reform Judaism brings me back into connection with wonderful classmates and colleagues. I know we want to talk about a lot of different pieces of your work, the place you live, this moment in America and in our world. And first, I would just love it if you could tell us a little bit about your story, your journey. And this is something that I love getting to ask folks about on the podcast, whether I know them well, have met them before or not, just to share with us about your journey.
My journey begins growing up in an interfaith home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I'm a proud Midwesterner from the beginning. And growing up in a home where my mom is Jewish, my dad is not, but my parents found it really important to raise me within sort of the Jewish framework, but that was really very cultural and not religious in any way. And I found my path toward organized Jewish life really in high school when I was involved in BBYO, and decided early on when I was in high school that I wanted to be a rabbi, trying to help serve people who were like me, who felt sort of on the outside of the Jewish community, and yet still really connected. I grew up in a home where liberal, progressive values were at the center of my life. And so from the beginning, I've always had this framework of what does it look like for me to be proudly Jewish and also proudly liberal. And that journey has ended up, I didn't realize it at the time when I was in high school, but trying to figure out how to align those values of being sort of first and foremost raised in an environment that was centered around liberal values, and then sort of the secondary values were Jewish religious framing. And then when I found myself on first the path toward becoming a rabbi, and then in a congregational setting, trying to figure out how to bring those sets of values together has ended up being the center of my work. And I don't know if that's by chance in some ways, because I have found myself in the state of Minnesota. We're a liberal state, and we've had a lot of challenges over the years and have been targeted. And also because I'm someone who, also cares about Israel and particularism as well. And so, from my time in the congregation and involvement in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, really brought me more at the center of justice work in Minnesota, through now finding myself at JCRC and being very heavily involved in, work of education and addressing antisemitism and supporting Israel education on college campuses. And at the same time, sort of like finding myself in this environment where, our democracy is under attack, particularly, obviously we'll talk more later about the ICE surge. But really, my whole journey has felt like this sort of alignment of like the universal and the particular.
Amazing. I hear so many pieces and threads in there that are both your own unique story and also, things that we hear from different folks, whether they go on to become clergy or are connected into Jewish community, right? This sense of feeling, how do I plug in? What's my place? And feeling this sense of connection, but what is the right doorway in?
Right. Exactly.
I'm curious, are there folks, aside from your own experience, maybe a mentor, maybe a role model, or someone who you feel helped you find your way in that journey?
So many people, my family members, sort of like watching the way that my parents, my cousins, people in my family who really sort of share that same foundational story, seeing the ways that they have navigated what it looks like to be on this journey of being both, sort of connected and disconnected from the formal Jewish community, and also on this path of navigating what it looks like to express American values, liberal values, and sort of feeling that like push and pull. The people who are closest to me, my closest friends, my family, are the ones who have continued to be my guides throughout this entire time.
Amazing. Let's talk a little bit more about your professional path. So you served in a congregation for 10 years, for a decade, as you said, and now you're in an amazing new role with the JCRC. Many folks, of course, will be familiar with their own JCRCs, with their Jewish Communal Relations Councils, and others may not be as familiar. And I think the position that you're holding is quite unique. So I'd love to hear more about that too.
There's so much to say about this transition from congregational work to organizational work on so many different levels. I'm sure we could talk about the personal lens of, just being able to spend more time with my family, and the, being in a setting where I'm able to spend Shabbat with my family. It's just so unbelievable, and I can't say enough about it. And I know I'm sure, a topic for another that you've had with many others about what it means to be a female rabbi and a parent in this difficult work. But I mention it because it's such a important part of my transition and the difference between congregational and organizational work. But professionally, again, like so many different layers to what it looks like to be operating in a space where in some ways the work that I'm doing is so similar to what I was doing in the congregational setting when it comes to education, when it comes to supporting folks in our community when they're struggling with issues that come up, whether it's from a pastoral lens or trying to figure out how to navigate the multiple spaces that they operate. My position is a new position at JCRC as Director of Campus Affairs. I was really hired in response to the increase in antisemitism and the struggle on college campuses across Minnesota and North and South Dakota, where we serve, after October 7th. And our local JCRC was really bombarded with a need to support college students. And I'm really grateful that community members recognize that in order to create systemic change on college campuses, we needed to transition away from just being reactive, like some incident occurs and somebody, supports that student, or to trying to really bring a more proactive approach to improving the campus climate, introducing dialogue initiatives, and to try to build relationships in a way that can create change as opposed to just operating in that reactive zone. That's the reason for my position. And I do think it's pretty unique across the country. There are not many other JCRCs that have this dedicated role.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to hear you describe, of course, the different settings that you've worked in. And I really relate to you around the idea that you're a rabbi first and foremost, and you're the rabbi that you're going to show up as. And many of the pieces of the work are transferable or directly related between the different settings. As someone who served in a congregation and now leads an organization, absolutely, I relate to that too. And I think something that is interesting to me about the role that you have is, if we went back 6-9 months, a year, then college campuses were really like this flashpoint, right? They were very hot in the news around issues of anti-Semitism, Israel, the war, and just the experience of Jewish students on campus. Now, I'm not saying everything is amazing and calm and all the rest, but it wasn't before either. It wasn't before that way before October 7th. It's a bit cooler, perhaps. I'm curious kind of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. And I'm curious, in this perhaps cooler moment, is that a time or a place or a way to lay some important foundation and groundwork to sort of build connection and community?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is quieter in the sense that there are not encampments. There are still protests, but it's a lot quieter. That means that there's really an opportunity to start building and creating that change, because we're less focused on the day-to-day fires that were erupting, last academic year, and certainly the 2023-2024 academic year. It's amazing to be able to see, working with the students, working with the faculty and the administration, the desire for, especially amongst the administrators in a variety of the campuses across Minnesota, to look at this as an opportunity to build. And I'm starting to see some of that happen. And at the same time, it doesn't get the attention because it's not some, major, incident or protest or encampment. And so I don't know sometimes if that's good or bad. Sometimes it's good to have all of the attention, and sometimes it's not. In some ways, it's interesting. Maybe it's similar to this transition we're making here with what's happening with ICE. It's sort of, I can see the parallel there, actually.
Yeah, so that's really interesting to me. I'm curious, just to stay on campuses for a moment, is there a story or an interaction with a student or a moment that stands out so far from your work?
I had a really difficult experience in the fall where I was invited to a college to give a presentation about dialogue and dialogue initiatives, and was protested at that talk by a group of anti-Israel students. And it was a really difficult experience. But the reason I'm sharing it is because from that experience have now been multiple conversations with the administration at that college to talk about what happened, what can we do differently, and to think about that event as hopefully an opportunity to do the type of work that they set out to when they made the initial invitation. And sometimes something really difficult has to happen that makes everybody realize, wow, we really do have a problem here that we need to address. And maybe it's to sort of light the fire in a different kind of way than before. And so I have been really encouraged by some of the continuing conversations that I've now been able to have, and to really see a commitment for deeper learning and dialogue, which was the initial hope. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, it's been a really powerful learning experience for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And those are the types of stories that stand out to me the most in some ways, right? You were there to talk about dialogue, right? Like if folks sort of look past the who and get to what you're actually there standing for and hoping to engage in, then we sort of understand that the concept of just a blanket protest or just no, or no openness or understanding that we're here to be in dialogue and conversation with each other, that's where I feel like we still have so much to do. And it really stands out that that's what you were exactly there to speak about.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. But it's, of all things to protest, it wasn't like I was there to give a talk on Israel or on anti-Semitism. It was specifically about dialogue.
Has dialogue and engagement been something that you've been a part of your rabbinate in the past?
Yeah, so I have been a part of a number of different dialogue initiatives. After October 7th, I started a dialogue with a Palestinian neighbor. We have done a number of things together. First of all, just being in dialogue, just the two of us. And then we've expanded that to a slightly bigger group of 4 people. And we had a few public events and have started to think about what it might look like to expand those circles and to try to bring others along. We kind of take each other to different educational events, which has been a really positive experience. And I'm also trying to think about and work toward bringing that to campuses and seeing if the two of us can do some of this work together.
That's amazing. And, just to do that with your own neighbor, to really have that concrete way of demonstrating, like, we live together. This is our community. This is our lives. But not everyone would do that. Not everyone would get into conversation. Not everyone would do that during the war. And now I imagine there are starting to be, hopefully, more openings and opportunities for you and others to do that kind of work and to get into conversation, whether it's in communities or on college campuses or beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of people who feel very worried or threatened by dialogue, or maybe misunderstand what the purpose of dialogue is. And I definitely heard from a lot of people, especially early on in 2023, 2024, who were really concerned that by even sharing space with somebody who is Palestinian descent, that it was sort of platforming their ideas and not understanding that really the idea behind it is we are two people who have different idea. We're not standing next to each other because I'm saying I think he's right about everything. We're standing together because we disagree, and we're showing that we can still do that in a civil way and in a respectful way. And that, again, like, we live in the same neighborhood. We see each other, around town, and we need to figure out how to live together, even with our differences.
Yes, I think that's so important, and something that really gets lost in some of these kind of conversations is just because you appear in a public setting with someone or engage in conversation doesn't mean that you agree on every single thing. It's the assumption of, oh, if they're standing up with this person who I, in my box that I have to put the two of them in, put them into 2 different boxes, then she must actually agree with everything that he's saying, as opposed to the very opposite of modeling that you agree, right? Folks are more able to say, oh, 2 women rabbis with all the other traits and characteristics that we share, like, they must agree on things, but like we also probably have things that if we get into it would be distinguishing or different for us, talk about theology, whatever else. So I think that it's such an important point that gets lost when people are looking to divide rather than to say, now more than ever, it's important for us to stand next to each other, especially because we don't agree on many things.
Right, exactly.
Let's talk about this current moment in Minneapolis, in your city. And I think, if folks opened up any news source in the past several weeks, then for many weeks, Minneapolis was at the top of the headlines, the situation with ICE. I really wanted to speak with you both for your own firsthand experience of what it's like just to be someone who is living in this city that's been such a flashpoint in the past several weeks, and then also share some reflections on what it's like to be a rabbi, a leader in the community as well.
It's hard to know where to even begin. For many weeks, at least 6 weeks, if not more, it really felt like everything that people were reading about and seeing on the news, like whatever you were seeing, it really was worse. Actually being here. And words cannot express how, life really just was almost like put on pause for everything that was happening around us. I mean, the number of ICE agents in this very small area was felt by everybody. And so I think one of the reasons why Minneapolis and the whole entire state really stood up united against the ICE surge was because it was impacting everybody, and it wasn't just something that happened in one location. ICE agents were deployed really all over the Twin Cities metro. It just was felt everywhere. I mean, I saw ICE agents on a very regular basis. They were in my back alley. People were deported, just one block from my house. And I live in a suburb. And so I think that's another important piece to identify, that it wasn't just concentrated in, the downtown Minneapolis area. The impact has really been felt across the entire metro. And, just being a parent, personally trying to figure out how to navigate conversations with my children about what was happening with their friends and schoolmates. There was an incident where a family was taken at the bus stop right before our bus stop. And, I've got one kid in elementary school and two in middle school. And, my elementary school student who we were talking about, what happened. And he's, a first grader was taken, and, he was like, I know him. And, trying to figure out how to have, just as a person, as a parent, trying to figure out how to have these conversations with my kids. It's been very challenging to navigate that. And, people who live very close to me have been in hiding. And so also trying to navigate, both supporting those families and also, again, as a parent, trying to figure out how to talk to my kids about the fact that their neighbors haven't left the house for 2 months. That's just sort of on the personal, on the ground level.
So difficult, so challenging, and really unthinkable, right? And I think you really summed it up by saying whatever you've seen on the news, it's worse. And also just that's what I've heard from other folks is how just the proliferation of what's going on, and that it's really felt by all people. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience as a faith leader and how being a rabbi, how Judaism, how the faith community, perhaps interfaith efforts have played a role in standing up and speaking out.
The flip side of how horrible it has been to experience this is being part of this really incredible movement that in many ways I think is being driven and led by a lot of faith communities, in addition to many others as well. Being able to be part of that resistance effort has been extremely moving and empowering. The faith community in the Twin Cities has been so united in our response, and that has been both within the Jewish community and beyond. I really cannot think of any other example or any other time where you have, first of all, we know within the Jewish community, there's a lot of diversity, there's a lot of division. And even our ability to put out statements that include all rabbis or that include all synagogues and institutions is not something that we're able to do in Minnesota. And we were able to do it in response to ICE. And so that, first and foremost, that's really powerful. And then that extends beyond to the broader faith community, being able to stand with the Catholic Church and also a lot of the more progressive faith leaders has been extremely moving. And also just sort of to tie it back to what I was talking about before with what it looks like to come together in solidarity and in coalition, we're really looking at this moment as an opportunity to rebuild a lot of the coalitions that were lost after October 7th. I was reflecting with a few other rabbinic colleagues about how we have started to see relationships restored that were lost, that were broken, and even being able to show up in the same spaces together at there's been so many interfaith gatherings and vigils and protests, and to be able to stand next to people who we haven't seen in over 2 years is extremely powerful. And so it's amazing to be able to be so united and to see just so many people engaged in this work in different ways. And so I've been involved in a few different efforts, some of the interfaith gatherings and the talks, also some of the mutual aid campaigns that are helping to support, those who are suffering the most, the advocacy efforts, it's happening on so many different fronts. And to be able to be part of that as a faith leader has been just so inspiring for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you named that about rebuilding relationships and coalitions, because I've really observed it as well, too. I think it's the point of there may be many things, and we were talking about this a bit earlier, right, around dialogue initiatives, right, where we are not going to agree on certain things, but we agree about this is urgent, this is moral, and we need to work together and talk about this. One of the most powerful recent interfaith experiences that I had was at a rally, a gathering last spring at the National City Church around the rescission of the sensitive locations policy that many different denominations and faiths, the reform movement with URJ and CCAR taking the lead in that front, and WRJ supporting the efforts, and others around the country because of URJ and CCAR representing congregations and rabbis. We were there to say we support immigrants and refugees, like full stop, right? So we were standing in a much more multi-faith, diverse coalition of partners than we had really been able to in a long time. And when we say, basic principles and verses from our text and tradition and say words that unite us, then we understand, of course, the urgency of the situation and the real people, the most vulnerable among us whose lives are at risk. And also, we can do this, right? We have to put aside the things that we've been enabling to divide us. And when we need to, for these moments, we can come together, which means we can do it beyond these moments of crisis or urgency.
Exactly. And that is something that I have seen happen in such a beautiful way here that, frankly, I didn't know if it was going to be possible. I mean, a few months ago, we're talking about almost operating from an assumption that it is not going to happen or that things are only going to get worse and more divisive, more polarized. And here, all of a sudden, we find ourselves in this moment where a few months ago, we thought we would never speak to some of these people again. And now we're standing side by side, citing the same texts and, sometimes putting our arms around each other. And it just has been a really powerful moment. And, we're still sort of in the thick of it right now, but we are starting to transition to whatever this new phase looks like. And I really hope that we're going to be able to carry with us this unity we were able to find and figure out, okay, now we know it's possible. We just proved that we can do it. Like, what does it look like when we're not in maybe as much of an acute crisis, but a crisis nonetheless?
Yes, I'm really curious about what some of those texts or teachings are that you've been finding have been, giving you the ability to speak into this moment or giving you strength. Something that came to mind for me just now is, the idea from the story of our ancestor Abraham of there came a time when God put Abraham to a test, right? And like we are being tested in every way, not so much in the divine punishment and reward sense of things, but in the sense of our democracy is being tested, is at risk, and these relationships. And it's about how are we going to show up and what are we going to choose? And are we going to see that the ultimate thing that we need to do is come together to be able to stand together despite lines of difference?
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's so powerful. There's so many beautiful texts in our tradition that I've been turning to. In some ways, the obvious texts of, loving the ger and supporting our neighbor and the immigrant and remembering that, we were once, strangers in a strange land. And, the texts that typically guide us toward, why it's so important for us to support our neighbors and immigrants in our community. And also, in addition to that, I have been really thinking a lot, especially in the last 2 weeks or so, about what our tradition can teach us and how our sacred text can guide us in thinking more broadly beyond the issue of immigration and loving our neighbor, really thinking about what is our responsibility and how do we show up when we're trying to figure out how to navigate the abuses of power that we're seeing from the federal government more broadly. Yes, through the lens of immigration, but it's really broader than that. And a story that I've been teaching now a few different times is the story of when King David abuses his power, has the affair with Bathsheba, and finds a way to ensure that Bathsheba's husband Uriah is murdered in sort of an unnecessary battle. And the prophet Nathan recognizes that King David has gone astray. And Nathan has to figure out, what do I do about this? How do I confront the king who has just abused his power and basically murdered his lover's husband? What Nathan does is he approaches King David and he tells him this parable of, a shepherd who has many sheep and then a shepherd who only has one, and that the shepherd with many sheep goes and he takes the shepherd who only has one, and he takes that sheep and he offers it up for a festive meal. And, Nathan says to David, like, what should we do about this? And David said, this is horrible. This is, a nightmare. This person should be punished. He had everything he ever needed, and he took from someone who had almost nothing. And, then Nathan responds to him saying, Atah ha'ish, you are this man. You are the person who has abused your power. And King David immediately understands that he's gone astray, and that he then engages in, his process of repentance and tries to figure out, how to find his way again on the path. I use this story because I think about what this story teaches us about how we can try to confront our leaders when we recognize that they have abused their power. And Nathan doesn't necessarily say, like, I'm going to burn it all down. He says, I am going to find a way to get my leader to recognize they have erred and that they need to repent. And I think that is in a lot of ways like what we've done in Minneapolis is we have stood up, and we're not saying burn it all down, or we're not giving in to, I think that there were some in the federal government who hoped that we would have riots in the street and that we would start to, attack ICE agents. And that has not happened at all. Minnesota residents have peacefully protested and have shown that there's a way to create change without ourselves becoming violent. So I think it's been a really powerful teaching that I've been playing with recently and trying to think about like how we can embody the prophet Nathan when we're engaged in advocacy.
Oh, it's such a good text. I'm so glad you shared it. It fits this situation so well. I love it. It doesn't get shared often enough. Staying in our text frame, Purim season is upon us. It's a very exciting time for people who love Purim and for people who host Purim-themed podcasts where we look at women's experience and the story of Esther as our inspiration. That moment where Esther is in the right place at the right time and Mordecai says to her, who knows, maybe it's just for this moment that you find yourself in the position to lead. That inspires all of the amazing conversations that I get to have with women leaders. We're on our 5th season now, which is just amazing to get to continue to explore and to probe this question. And in honor of Purim and in honor of Esther and all those who lead in this way, I'm wondering, is there a moment like that for you? Or how on this Purim, with all that's going on in your city and in the world, are you interpreting and seeing Esther's story today?
I have felt the sense of responsibility or obligation or, recognizing that we have no other choice but to stand up and really to go above and beyond. I mean, I think that right now what this moment calls for is not only, just being human in a place where there sometimes it feels like there are no humans, and I think that that's something that I'm seeing, everybody step into. But for me personally, I really feel like it is incumbent upon me to maybe, stay up a few extra hours or spend the extra time, whatever it is going to take, because I can see that the way that we act really does make a difference. And, looking around at the impact that I've seen my neighbors able to have on our community, it is a reminder that one person really can make a difference. And we have a responsibility at this time. And I have a responsibility, as a rabbi, as a person, as a Jew, to really give everything that I can to ensure that things go in the right direction for us, and that I don't just, I want to be able to be a person who, can look back at this time and really be able to say, I did everything I possibly could to make a difference, and that I'm not going to just sit here and look at my neighbors hiding in their homes and not do anything about it. This moment has felt like that type of calling for me and our whole state.
I'm your host, Rabbi Liz Hirsch, CEO of Women of Reform Judaism, and you've been listening to Just for This. Check us out on most social media platforms at Just for This Podcast. You can also follow Women of Reform Judaism at WRJ1913. Our show is produced by Shear and Shim LLC. Special thanks to Allie Rubin, Izzy Wellman, the whole WRJ team, Rabbi Neil Hirsch, Lior, and Micah. Jen King designed our logo, and Eric Shimalonis wrote our theme music. Thanks for listening. We'll have more Just for This moments next time.